Merton McClure. I'm the president of Spalding University. I might repeat that, but I doubt it. That was a go. Okay. My name is Tori Merton McClure. I serve as the president of Spalding University. I want to welcome you here this evening and thank you for being here because this topic is incredibly important. I want to kind of give my homage to the Courier because my greatest mentor in my life was Barry Bingham Jr. and he and I exchanged about 1,000 pages of correspondence. We were pen pals in the old Victorian sense of we would have lunch once in a while, but most of our exchanges were via the written word, which I sort of despair for the current generation that they don't have that because they're in the Twitter world. Safer Sidelines is an incredibly important problem and topic, and I know as a leader of a resource-constrained institution, we always talk about the ideal world and what we should do versus what we can afford to do. And in this world, the gap is so small and we pretend it's incredibly large. So I've got to start with my bona fides, as we would say in the legal world. So y'all know I rode a boat across the ocean. Y'all know I skied to the South Pole. Maybe you don't, but now you do. I was also the acting board chair of the Board of Governors of the NCAA football season COVID 2020. The Autonomy 5 commissioners were losing their minds. There is a woman from a Division III school that doesn't have football making a decision whether there's going to be football in the United States of America. What is wrong with this picture? Gentlemen, take a breath. It will be okay. But the safety of our student athletes is the one thing that the NCAA does better than anything else it does. And the person, Brian Hainline, who is essentially the medical director for the NCAA, is an extraordinarily amazing human who, at first he would talk about concussion, and then he would talk about sleep hygiene being a really important issue for our 18 to 22-year-olds because we don't let them sleep. We have them practicing at 6 a.m. We have them reviewing tape at 10 p.m., and we're not allowing them to sleep. And he got no attention until he started to describe sleep as a performance-enhancing drug. All of a sudden, he had everyone's attention. So the balance between what we need to do and what we can afford to do is really actually very small. And what we should do is we should have a master's level athletic trainer on the sideline for every athletic endeavor in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We can't afford to do that. We say we can't afford to do that. All right, there are steps down. I'll get to those. Concussions are real. The damage left from concussions are real. We have seen it quite recently in Louisville, Kentucky, that folks who are damaged by concussions over time can do great harm. And we need to care for them appropriately. And at Spalding, we adjust our concussion protocols annually because we learn new things. And the NCAA is at the forefront of studying that, and they put information out, and woe to us who don't follow that. So more bona fides. I am an EMT. I've been an emergency medical technician for more than 20 years. Not only that, I'm a wilderness EMT, which is how can we deal with a medical crisis with the contents of a backpack that you've been carrying for 30 days? It doesn't cost a lot to be prepared to deal with heat stroke. You need a kiddie pool and some ice, or a kiddie pool and some cold water. But woe to us if we don't have the folks on the sidelines who can recognize what heat stroke looks like. And yeah, AEDs, they used to be incredibly expensive. Not so much anymore. If you can afford a little overtime here, you can afford an AED, an automated external defibrillator to be on the sideline. And so I'm going to turn it over to the experts, but this is an issue that is near and dear to the heart of Spalding University. And the other thing I haven't talked about is mental health. There is a mental health crisis in the United States of America. How we deal with folks with mental illness is a crime in the United States, and I can prove it because we put them in jail. Like, we do not treat folks with mental illness with any kind of appropriateness. At Spalding, our athletic director, God love him, is all about dealing with the mental health issues of young people who've come out of COVID. They have extra challenges. And Brian Hainline, again, an extraordinary human who works for the NCAA. He may have left. I've been gone for a year or two. Brian would say, a meeting with a couple thousand people in the audience, he would say, all right, how many of you have been trained in CPR? Literally, raise your hands. Do you have CPR training? Let me say for the folks online, most of the audience. How many of you have trained for a mental health crisis? Many, but not as many. How many of you have to use CPR? A few. How many of you have addressed a mental health crisis with a colleague? More. And the issue is we spend a lot of time training for cardiac arrest among high school and college-age folks when high school and college-age folks are having mental health crises more regularly, and we need to beef up on that. So that is way longer than I was supposed to give. I was just saying, welcome to Spalding University. Good to have you here. And I should know who I'm supposed to hand it off to, but I'm just going to get away from the microphone. Thank you.
You're never supposed to follow a passionate person like Tori. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Irby Jones, and I am the executive editor of the Courier-Journal. Thank you, Tori and Spalding University, for partnering with us on this important dialogue. Last fall, the Courier-Journal decided to take a deeper look at deaths among young athletes. What Stephanie K., as we called her, Kuzadim, uncovered during her months-long research and reporting resulted in a 4-part series, Safer Sidelines. Safer Sidelines pointed to the many ways we as a society have failed to prepare for sudden death in sports. Tonight, we will continue our work with this community conversation. This work that we did at the Courier-Journal was a result of passion by Stephanie and also support by editors like Rob Byers, Vita Morgan, photographers, and other folks on our staff. So thank you all. But especially thank you to Stephanie for her persistence and dedication as she worked to get important journalism out into the world that I hope would change our community forever. Thank you.
How is everybody doing? We ready? We're good. All right. Well, we've got a nice crowd here today, and we have even more watching online on our website and YouTube from across the state and nationally on our live stream. I'm just going to lower this a little bit. If you have any questions, Vita has cards. Vita's over here. And you can write them down and give them to her, and we'll get them answered. I'm Stephanie Kuzadum. I started working on this project for the Courier-Journal in September after I received a grant from the University of Southern California's Center for Health Journalism. And I'm just going to take a second to pause and totally be in awe of all of you for showing up. This has been a topic I've researched for 9 years, and at times I felt like I was in a bubble. And so to see everybody show up on your own time just means a lot to me, so thank you. We have 4 panelists today. First is Mr. Julian Tackett. He is the commissioner of the Kentucky High School Athletics Association, where he's worked for more than 4 decades and has been the commissioner for the last 13 years. The KHSAA is comprised of 288 member school athletic departments, both public and private throughout the Commonwealth. And Commissioner Tackett has worked on a lot of sport safety legislation, including House Bill 383, which created sport safety courses for coaches and eventually required venue-specific emergency action plans for athletic departments, as well as House Bill 331, which is the newest piece of legislation that was just signed by Governor Beshear. Dr. Alma Maddox is the program director for Spalding University's Masters of Science in Athletic Training. Spalding is just one of 2 athletic training programs with continuing accreditations for a professional master's in the state of Kentucky. And the other is Northern Kentucky University, where Dr. Maddox previously worked to coordinate clinical education for NKU's athletic training program. She's also worked previously as an athletic trainer for a Division III school in Oregon. Next is Representative Kim Mosier. She represents the Commonwealth's 64th District, Taylor Mill in Northern Kentucky. She is actually a registered nurse as well, who received her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Spalding. She tried to pass AED-related bills in 2017 and 2018 and was just successful in passing House Bill 331. She has 5 sons, all who took part in athletics. And then Mr. Matt Mangine is the father of Matthew Mangine Jr. Along with his wife, Kim, they created the Matthew Mangine Jr. One Shot Foundation following their eldest son's collapse and death on a practice field during soccer conditioning in June of 2020. The foundation works to provide AEDs and hands-on CPR training to coaches and athletes. So thank you all, and we're gonna jump right in. I'm going to start a timer. Matt, you taught me after DC. All right. So the first finding includes that states aren't adopting gold standards for care for high school athletes. We focused on just 4 of those gold standards. There are many. The one is athletic venue-specific emergency action plans, wet bulb globe temperature monitors, cold water immersion tubs, and AEDs. Sports medicine gold standards are meant to protect youth athletes from harm and potentially save a life, but just 4 states require all 4. So, Dr. Maddox, I'm going to start with you. What role do athletic trainers play in keeping Sidelines safe?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so the gold standards that Stephanie just discussed, most of those are well researched by athletic trainers and put into place in our position statements by athletic trainers. So athletic trainers are healthcare professionals that often are the front lines at high schools, at colleges, at many other settings as well. And so we are typically the first people there when something happens. And so we have to see, okay, what's going on? Is this something that I can deal with right now, or is this something that I need to call 911 and we need to get this person, more emergent care? So, as athletic trainers, one of our primary goals is focusing on what can we do and what can we have in place to make sure we're prepared. So there's constant research in the field of athletic training looking at what are the things that we need to do to prevent sudden cardiac arrest, to prevent illness from, or heat illness deaths, to prevent, death from sickle cell. So all of these different sudden cardiac death things that we want to make sure that we prevent. So athletic trainers are a huge part of this. We really want to focus on always providing the best and most efficient care for our athletes and our sidelines. So we're big proponents of not just being on the sidelines, but making sure that we have adequate equipment on the sidelines so that if someone goes down and we are suspecting heat illness, we can treat them. If someone goes down and we are suspecting cardiac arrest, we can put an AED on them and get them safe and hopefully give them a chance to survive.
I'm actually going to stay with you, and because Commissioner Tackett and I have talked about this before. There's a supply and demand issue of athletic trainers, especially in rural settings in Kentucky. So is there a concern that because we don't have enough athletic trainers, there's not enough advocacy for these gold standards in high schools?
Yes, that is a huge concern. I think that, athletic training, typically in our traditional settings, we work in the high school and college settings. And since COVID, we've actually seen a lot of athletic trainers leading those settings because they're traditionally low pay, they have terrible work hours, and they're not supported. And so that is a concern that we do have schools in Kentucky throughout the nation that don't have athletic trainers, that don't have access to that sideline care. So there is a concern, and as the National Athletic Training Association, that is our governing association, and they are constantly trying to raise awareness of why athletic training is important, why we are an important profession, and why we need to be on sidelines. It's something that we will continue to advocate for because this is very important. But there is a concern, and so that is something that I hope that everyone takes away from my perspective is that as athletic trainers, we are healthcare professionals, and we need to be valued and supported and given the tools that we need to be successful on the sidelines.
Mr. Mangine, as a parent of Kentucky athletes, what assumptions do you believe are made about sports safety when dropping children off?
I think it depends on the setting. In a high school setting with an athletic trainer there, I think you just assume everything is, following NATA guidelines, and you have a program and a system set up so that as a parent you feel very safe having your child dropped off at a high school or higher level sports venue. I think at a club level and youth level, that's kind of the next place to tackle after we tackle high schools, which we're not there yet. And again, youth levels have no athletic trainers unless you're in a big tournament. So, I think for most parents, what you need to do is there's questions that you need to ask of what if, something's not going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if. And that's the biggest thing for us is a lot of parents. We're only successful because of passionate parents that drive the change. Kim and I didn't ask the right questions. We just assumed, and that's something that, to this day, I think we both regret.
There are two ways, Commissioner Tackett, that states implement gold standards on high school sidelines, either through state legislation or through regulation set up by sports associations. So in Kentucky, whose role is it to implement gold standards?
Thanks, Stephanie. It's probably a combination here because we're reminded of this once a year, whether it's 30 days or 60 days. We're very much a local control state. They try to stay out of mandates, but they step in when they need to. And we also have, but that local control goes all the way down. So it becomes challenging. It was interesting listening to the discussion about trainers because for years the debate, even in the legislature, was about what they call the Practices Act for trainers. And it took a good 15 years to finally get some changes made, not because anybody thought it was a bad idea, but because the territorial nature of some professions against each other, the potential loss of business, and that's only been changed for 2 or 3 years. And that's a real world thing. Well, that trickles down to the schools sometimes too. They feel like they've got a good situation, they've got it handled. So I think it takes a combination. We were out in front on the regulatory side, but we openly admitted on the AED side we were going to have some help. And from the legislature, we just knew there would be enough pushback that from doing it from the bottom up. So we've been pretty active. I think Representative Mosier and others will tell you we've been more active than sometimes they'd like us on a couple of these issues. But we just see that one is too many. But I just don't buy into the fact that something is inevitable somewhere. So just try to do what you can and move on. I think we're to a point where the data from a lot of places, including some of the stuff some of the things that you discovered, I think we've got a lot of soul searching going on among the schools right now, and that's really good. But I think it does take a combination.
A lot of that also, I guess, the conversation sometimes becomes about unfunded mandates, right?
Without question. I was sitting here looking at the things that I've heard initially from the passage of the bill. They knew we were involved, so some of the schools were pretty vocal. They knew we were helping the cost of the AED. I go back to 2 years ago when the price of the hard card, all the medical people in here know what I'm talking about, the CPR card as you get renewed, the cost of the hard card went to like $28 from the Red Cross, and you would have thought it was going to bankrupt people as much as they were complaining about it. and you know, an AED right now that everybody's got various prices. I deliberately, on the way up here, called the person that's been supplying most of our a lot of our schools, I'll just say. It's an institute out of Indiana, and they're still able to get around $1,100, $1,200 price. And delivery within 3 weeks. So you're going, and Mr. Mangini's done a fantastic job with the supply-demand area, especially in northern Kentucky. But you're like, you've got a problem with, some people will have a problem with a mandate on something like that, but they have no problem spending thousands of dollars to break down film of an athletic contest so they can prepare for their next opponent. And it's just, I think you're seeing more introspection. You're seeing more reflection of, is that really the right priority right now? But that is always going to be a push, and I think that anybody that's been around the legislature or in there will tell you it's not just this area. There's always a push about mandates that aren't funded.
Representative Mosier, the law does currently require a venue-specific EAP, which is a zero-cost policy, but the wet bulb globe temperature monitors, a cold water immersion tub, like what would it take to require those?
The cold water immersion? Well, you know, I think we do have some laws around certain medical emergencies. There currently is not a requirement for that. So, you know, again, it's going to come down to cost and who funds it, unfortunately. But, you know, as the commissioner said, you know, we see schools who have no problems spending money on AstroTurf for their fields or things that are seemingly, you know, certainly not health related. And, you know, we really take issue with the priorities that some of the schools put on, or the lack of priority that some of the schools put on the safety of our kids. We talk a lot about school safety in other areas, and we spend a lot of money making sure that our schools have locked doors, that we have metal detectors in some schools. We keep our kids safe when it's I don't know if it's a very public kind of issue. And what we did this year, and we've worked on this issue for years. I worked on this issue before I was ever part of the legislature with the Batson family, who are also from northern Kentucky, and the Mangines have gotten to know. And we've really worked to raise awareness around this issue and other school safety issues, you know, as it relates to healthcare. So, you know, we're just going to keep having to educate folks. We have a legislature who are by and large not medical personnel. I mean, but there are very few of us who have any sort of medical background, and so it does take a lot of education, and it takes you know, a lot of conversations to make sure that folks understand the importance of these safety measures. So that's really what we've done over the past few years. In answer to, you know, your first question and any funding question, that it's going to be the same. You know, just raising awareness and making sure that folks understand the importance of these issues.
One of the other findings of Safer Sidelines was that bills are often proposed, not just in Kentucky, but also across the nation. They're often proposed to require sideline safety and are often either defeated or changed. House Bill 331 started off as a bill to try and require AEDs, and it only recommends AEDs on sidelines for high schools as funds become available. So, Representative Mosier, sports safety laws, like we're talking about, they often revolve around a cost. And that's seen as what we said, an unfunded mandate. But other states like Pennsylvania, New York have done this where they've required it. So I guess, what does it take to pass a sports safety law that does have an associated cost?
Well, I think what we've done in this bill, in House Bill 331, is originally we required AEDs in all high schools and middle schools and school-sanctioned events. In the end, we instituted or implemented a recommendation for AEDs as funds become available, as you said. But we put in place a trust so that, and this was actually my plan, is last year was not a budget year. We pass a budget every other year, and so we don't appropriate funds in those non-budget years. And so in setting up a trust fund, it's my intent this year, this next budget year, to ask for an appropriation. And out of that, the Kentucky Department of Education would be able to grant schools who are in need of an AED or several AEDs in order to comply with the law, and also pay for CPR training for their coaching staff. So it's not that we don't have a plan. I knew that in a non-budget year, it was going to be virtually impossible to pass an appropriations bill, which this would have been. It requires a higher threshold of votes to pass that. So there are a lot of inner workings in passing legislation. Sometimes, and I've worked on this for years and years, and so I know the process. I know how to get things done, and I think that we'll be able to pass some sort of appropriation. I would also like to point out, and I've got the bill here, that it actually says that schools should maintain a portable AED in a public, readily accessible, well-marked location in every middle and high school building, and as funds become available. So that school-sanctioned middle school and high school practices and competitions would also have one. So the interpretation could be that there is actually a requirement for AEDs.
So let's talk just a little bit more about House Bill 331, if you're okay with that, just because I know there are a lot of members of athletic departments in the room. What will be included in order for schools to receive an AED, and will it be on a first-come, first-served basis?
You know what? That is to be determined. We will be writing regs with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services and the Kentucky Department of Education. And later this year, we typically, unless there's an emergency provision on legislation, it is not enacted until 90 days after the session ends, so that's about July 1st. That will start writing regulations, and in that time, we will come up with some forms. We'll work with Commissioner and others to determine what those requirements will be. What constitutes need-based. I presume it will be a lack of funding. And yes, I would think first come, first serve. The sooner that a school recognizes that they have this need, the better. And I would obviously encourage any schools who want to make sure that they are complying with the law in school safety measures to go ahead and get their applications in. But as I said, there are no funds in the trust unless we have a big donor in the audience who would like to contribute to that trust. But certainly the Mangines have a foundation, the Batsons have a foundation. There are ways to get help outside of the state as well.
Just speaking of, I know a lot of this is about associated costs, right? So what Safer Sidelines found was that the cost of gold standard equipment is actually like a tiny fraction of what schools end up spending on sports. So it was less than about $5 per participant. Commissioner Tackett, if supplying these gold standards is a small fraction of an overall department's budget, what can parents in schools and the association do to make sure that they start appearing on all sidelines?
Well, I think, first of all, let's don't underestimate the number of schools that have an abundance of AEDs right now. There are the vast majority on the high school level. I can't speak to the middle schools, and certainly I think Mr. Mangine brings up a really good point. There's as much non-school play going on with this risk as there is with school play. But our schools they've got enough in the building. They comply, and I'm really glad Representative Mosher brought up that line in the bill, because they comply with the basics. What we really still struggle with is education of people as we have constant turnover in administration. The people that started the safety plans in 2009 are very few are still involved in administration. The people that when the next step of the EAPs came in, I believe in 11, those people are gone. So it's a constant re-education of what the standard is. We were the first state in the country to require the measuring of a heat index, and we have been in what we knew would be a 5-year shift away from using the wet bulb, away from using the sling psychrometers to using the wet bulb globes. We're about 3 years into that, and we still, at the same time, some of our practitioners, and listen, that 8th grade Kramer course still sticks in the back of my mind as my only training certification, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert. But we still have some that insist on measuring it by a cell phone. They want to look at an app because it's convenient. And yet all the NATA guidance says the app doesn't matter. It's at the site. So it's educating, it's even educating practitioners sometimes. We've all got to be working on it together. You know, we long ago required a cooling tub to be available during the heat periods, but then we had people coming in, and with due respect to the illustrious president, they literally did bring in a kiddie pool that would probably not have covered the legs of most people, and we had to put, okay, you've got to be able to have the armpits down in the water. I mean, we had to put all the specs in there. So, but even that got pushed back for a $100 tub that you can get at Tractor Supply. It was amazing. So it's an education effort. And I tell you what we've done since the passage of this bill, frankly. We've been out about 3 times with different groups. We're already planning our regional meetings and all the chances we get to talk to educators. And frankly, you just try to scare the heck out of them. And that's really the only thing that motivates. It's just, are you really, because like it or not, and the lawyers in the room, I believe, will agree, because there's at least one lawyer in the room who said she was. Even if it's a recommendation, when it's in statute or regulation, it raises this expectation of the standard of care to where if you're in front of that jury with 6 people, how comfortable do you feel not going by it? So there has been significant progress made, and even better here, but it's constant education. You can't quit saying it because you said it last year, because half your audience is different. We got 50% of our athletic administrators are different than when the pandemic started. 50%. That's at the high school level. Middle school level is probably 75 because those jobs are thankless. So that's what it takes, is just educating and peer pressure. Peer pressure. I know when I was talking to a guy, and we don't have a purchase deal. The National Federation gave away a bunch of AEDs a few years back. We gave them to schools in need. This guy was their supplier, so we said, can you help us? I was talking to him on the way down here. He's talking about the fact that the best funding, and this is something we'll talk to Representative Mosier and others about, the best funding is to have some skin in the game on the part of the purchaser, but can you reduce the price? And that's I really like what some of the foundations are doing. We're not going to buy it for you, but we'll give you $400 if you'll buy it. Now the cost is $700. What's your excuse? You know, can we reduce the excuses? So it's going to take, I think, a tentacled effort in several different spots, whether it's peer pressure, whether it's pressure from the top, whether it's just pointing out situations that should never have happened, et cetera. It's going to take a little bit of everything.
Speaking about cold water immersion tubs, they're required on Sidelines by the KHSAA. The wording of it says in extreme weather circumstances. So I guess, what is that threshold defined as?
When the heat index is measurable where you might have an activity alteration, it's 84 degrees and above. So that's the trigger. When it's 84, you should have your whole heat plan, because I believe the chart starts at 84 degrees and 100% humidity starts activating. You got to adjust, and then there's calibration up and down based on the temperature going up or humidity being down. So it's pretty straightforward that when you get to where you're going to be measuring that's where you need to have it out there. And yet, if we went to every school, good people, don't get me wrong, but I bet you we could find 5 dry rotted tubs that haven't been moved in quite a while, and you could find that they had a provision for an ice machine, but it hadn't been fixed because when they were trying to get it fixed, the guy that used to work on it's no longer there, and they didn't get it worked. I mean, you would find stories here and there, and that's why getting this out continually will help, but it won't be a quick fix.
Dr. Maddox, why are these small costs a big deal for sports safety?
I mean, I like to think of it as what's the cost of a life affected. You know, I think that there's no amount of money that I could put on my child's life. And I think that when we think about nickel and diming things and, we're getting these new fields, but we can't spend $1,000 on an AED. I don't understand that. I don't understand that, how that is something that we can't find the money for. I think to me, and I think to most athletic trainers, we need to quit being reactive. We need to quit waiting until something happens, and we need to be proactive. And we need to make sure that we're spending the money on safety before we're even thinking about, adding new fields or adding turf fields or adding new sideline things. So I think we just need to be more proactive.
Mr. Mangina, as somebody who works with a lot of high schools, what is your feeling when you know that these costs maybe aren't as large as some of these schools feel like, and they come to you asking for a large amount of AEDs?
I've had a few schools come and ask for a large amount of AEDs, and you have to have those discussions. I had a giant school system reach out to me and said all of our schools, it was 26 schools, that we need AEDs at all of them. And I said, are you sure? You're a very big school system. I highly doubt that. And it was their athletic director. And we ended up talking to the superintendent of all the schools, and they found out that they only needed 3. They just needed a better place than the ones that they had. Equipment isn't necessarily an issue, especially at big school systems. The problem is awareness and availability and putting them in the right places so that they can be utilized. The night of my son's collapse, there was 5 there. Not one was brought to him. So equipment isn't necessarily the issue. What we're talking about here is education. And that's what we're trying to do at the foundation. We talk about practicing. You get your AED and CPR certification, and you renew it every 2 years. How many times do you practice it? I became good at my job because I did it over and over and over again. So our goal is to work with coaches and work even with athletes. We're doing it at some schools where we're teaching them hands-only CPR. They're not getting certification, but it might be the first time a lot of these kids have ever done CPR. So let's say there is a collapse on a field. I think it's 69% of catastrophic injuries happen at practice. Unfortunately, we're already talking about how we have a limited number of athletic trainers as there is. I think it's only 64% in the state of Kentucky. So we know there's not an athletic trainer at every practice. We need to better prepare our coaches and other athletes in case of a catastrophic event so that they know what to do. And it's not just about sudden cardiac arrest. I mean, there's a lot of other things catastrophically that can happen, and you need to teach these people how to not panic and not freeze up. And that's the biggest thing, is education is the key. We sit here and we debate about equipment, and it is a debate, and there is an equipment issue at certain places, but we need to do a better job of just making everybody aware and to educate people on a continuous basis.
Commissioner Tackett, some of that education and awareness comes in, having these different certifications and classes that the KHSA have, like the sports safety course. But when we asked for coaches' CPR certifications, we had found that a lot had let them lapse, or actually 170 or about 170 re-up theirs within 10 days of us requesting. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how do parents know their children's coaches will be prepared in case of an emergency?
It is interesting you say that, because one of the debates we've had around the office, we have a portal that the schools can keep their information up to date. And on adults, where you're not generally worried about FERPA and KFERPA, we've been discussing, is it really worth having that behind a login wall, or should we have that information public so that it's maintained? And we'd want to work with our partners at the Department of Ed. One of the things that scares me a little bit about the influence on our partners at the Department of Ed is we've only got 288, as she said. 50 of those are not governed by the Department of Ed. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to address the gaps. We've even offered to help with the AED inventory so we could pick up those 50 non-public schools at the same time. But that's something they've got to work out through the legislation. But as you look at that, why shouldn't there be if we're going to expose the competition statistics of a kid to help motivate him? We're putting down that you were 3 for 10 in the game last night, so you need to shoot better. Why would we not, this is kind of the way the discussion's been going, why would we not just have a list that, here it is? The question becomes, and this is where some of the pushback will come, is that a personnel record that districts protect, and therefore it's not public? And that's where we get into those discussions, because I know I just can't imagine. And the thing and I have to add this point because when y'all were talking just a minute ago, when Mr. Mangine was talking, the worst piece of film I think I've ever seen in my life was a 15-second piece interviewing two kids who were at a school where they had a situation, and they literally were running around the school like chickens with their head cut off because they didn't know where the AED was. The most important thing that still sticks to me is what he keeps saying, and I keep listening to every single time, is location, location, and location. And we had people when we gave AEDs away to schools, and this was out of 7 or 8 years ago, and we asked them to prioritize ones that hadn't had one or didn't have one. And we had people saying, well, we need one that can travel because the other one stays locked up in my office because the students want to break the cabinet off the wall. Excuse me? Really? You've got that kind of issue. But now the supply is better, but the kids now, some great legislation that our General Assembly passed within the last 2 or 3 years requires the kids to have CPR training. But does that also require them to know where the AED is? And does it require a map to be distributed where it is? And so it's just little pieces that just seems like cause problems. Do you care to guess what the number one question we're getting? How come there's requirements in here about my school nurse who doesn't want anything to do with sports? She just does the vaccine records, but she's got to sit through rehearsal. And my response has been the same. The first time the rehearsal benefits them, she'll never ask that question again. And I am certainly not besmirching nurses at all, but that's the question some of the administrators have asked. So why is the school nurse lumped into this? Because she didn't ask for that. So I don't know. It's a constant bring up the issue and you're playing whack-a-mole with the objections. But if we can get to that location issue and get to some of that supply issue, I think we're going to make some really good improvements.
Dr. Maddox, athletic trainers advocate for the health and safety of athletes. So, speaking to parents, how can parents advocate for sports safety changes on behalf of their children?
I mean, I think exactly what the Mangines are doing is one of the big things, is just asking questions. You know, like Doug Casa, I know he was someone that you had mentioned in your articles, but he talks about if you're going to a game, you know, going up to find the AED and say, hey, do you have an AED on your sidelines? Do we have an athletic trainer here? Who's providing medical care? And holding them accountable to that. And if they say, you know, oh no, we don't have anyone, say, well, what are you going to do if an emergency happens? So I think as parents, you know, we need to ask these questions. We need to be willing to do the research and see what is out there, and are these things in place that we think should be and we know should be.
Mr. Mangine, I think probably everybody in the room would ask you how you've moved forward. But what I really want to know is how, as a collective community, do we move forward?
You know, I think the biggest thing is that, you know, Kim and I this is our grief process. We're using this to, you know, make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. We have another child that I want to make sure that if he's ever unfortunately in the same situation, that we don't have to go through the same outcome. And that's kind of the way I look at it is I look at all these kids in the state of Kentucky as our kids now, and we want to make sure that the next time something that's similar to that happened, like our situation, is a better outcome. You know, let's face it, I'm not sitting here today if January 2nd doesn't happen. You know, January 2nd was something that has opened a lot of people's eyes in the entire United States. And I've had a lot of opportunities to ride the train and for people to actually listen to something that we've been talking about for 2 years. And, it's been great because people are finally listening and our message is finally getting across to what we're trying to do. So, I can't say it enough. I don't know that I would, we might not be here today if January 2nd on national television doesn't happen. The world got to see what my wife had to witness, and unfortunately our situation didn't turn out the same.
We're going to open it up, I think, for questions. Sure. Oops. Actually, we're going to have Representative Mosier add something real quick.
Yeah, I wanted to, just add something, that a big part of this bill, this legislation, it really was not only focused around the equipment piece. We talk a lot about AEDs and how important they are, but, and I know that it's been mentioned, the emergency action plan is really the most important piece. It's critical that individuals are aware of the possibility, and that they're informed, they're educated, but also the emergency action plan. And we were very intentional to work with the American Heart Association on the Cardiac Emergency Response Plan, the CERP, and we put it in the statute to make sure that this curriculum, this educational format is followed, so that folks are very aware of the steps that they need to take. And not only the steps, but the emergency action plan in the Mangene's situation was not followed because there was a requirement for an emergency action plan. It's just that it wasn't simulated. And so the folks on the field at the time didn't know who was supposed to call 911, who's supposed to start compressions, who's supposed to go get the AED. You have to actually simulate this and rehearse that simulation of an emergency. And when I was in school here at Spalding, we simulated all sorts of clinical responses. And if you don't do that with athletic trainers and with your coaching staff, and frankly, other volunteers, I would love to have included any volunteer who works with kids to have to be CPR certified, or at least have some AED certification, know what the emergency action plan is. And we talked about not only the emergencies that happen on the field or in schools, but on field trips. And we're not requiring AEDs on those field trips, but what is required is an emergency action plan. And parents who go on these trips should know where the AED is at the zoo, and who's going to call 911. It's very simple. I mean, it would literally take 3 minutes to kind of run through this with your volunteers. And so it's really the emergency action plan that we wanted to solidify and strengthen in this language.
It's one of my favorite parts after joining the Courier Journal is everybody knowing me working on this work and hearing AEDs all the time, and now I get it pictures pointed out wherever we're walking through. Vita pointed out Spalding's AED in here earlier, so it's important. It's good to know because you never know when. Okay.
All right, lots of questions, and one of them actually you just spoke to, Representative Moser, which is, are AEDs useful if school staff don't know where they are? And just speaking to the importance of having a plan, which you just did, but I did want to point out that was one of the questions. Another one, who specifically should parents reach out to in order to figure out how to organize enough things like AEDs and cold tubs for their specific schools? And a second part to this, how can teachers leverage their administrators or athletic department boosters to purchase the things that are needed to keep kids safe?
Sure.
I can take that one. As a parent, again, on our website, we actually took it from the Jordan McNair Foundation's website, is the 10 questions that you should ask every coach, and that's at any level. That's youth, high school, college, anything. His son passed away at the University of Maryland, and that's a NCAA Division I program. He is the last NCAA Division I player to die of a preventable death at a practice. And again, he came up with those questions, and Kim and I use them all the time. Every time we talk or we do a presentation, it's on our website, it's on his. That's something that every parent should go to their child's coach and say, here's my questions. This is what I want to know. Where's your AED? What is your updated emergency action plan? What are you going to do if I'm not there? Who's going to ride with my child in the ambulance in case of an emergency? Those are things that everybody needs to ask. When it comes to teachers and administrators, leveling that, I had one, again, I'm not going to name names, but I had a school reach out to me about the athletic trainer reached out, asked for an AED donation. because his girls soccer coach wanted to carry one with him. 3 days later, I got a call from the athletic director, and he said, we are getting 12 more. We showed a piece about your family and your story, and the board unanimously voted to buy 12 more and to put it in the budget so that every coach during every season can now carry an AED. Again, that's something that is awesome, and I would love to see across every state and throughout the United States. Let's face it, it's not feasible for everyone. But when you make it a priority, you know, you're better prepared. So those are the things. It's passionate people that drive these. You know, where we have our most success is not me going out and beating on doors. It's people coming to us because another parent or another administrator is the one who is breaking down that door and making sure that they're ready.
Okay, next question. The number of schools in Kentucky that offer athletic training degrees is decreasing. How do we reverse this trend?
I guess that one's probably for me. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, yes, it is decreasing. I think, you know, we've got to figure out what the problem is. And, you know, I think some of the problem is pay. You know, I think some of the problem is support, and making sure that they have the things that they need. So I think, you know, things like this will continue, hopefully, for young people going through college and going through our program. We have students in our program right now, and hopefully this will help them understand, like, hey, there is a need for athletic trainers at high school and want to get into that. And so just advocating and continuing to do that. But I also think we need to continue to advocate for the profession to make sure that we're retaining those athletic trainers once we get them, and that we're paying them well and that we're giving them the resources they need to be supported so that they stay.
Let me add something, if I don't care, that we're hearing quite a bit from some of the younger athletic trainers, and maybe it's a little bit of a challenge for the profession, is sometimes if you're not careful, it becomes the fellowship of the miserable. And when you're trying to recruit people, you're also down-mouthing the situation you've got as a trainer. We hear that a lot from young people. Look, this person, they're miserable. I don't know if I want to get into that. We haven't really gotten time to promote. It's so new that now you can make a career. The big thing we used to ask when we were trying to help with the Praxis Act, and certain other groups had other priorities and insurance and everything, so they didn't push it as hard. But the question we kept asking was, how can we guarantee that there's something when a game's not being played for them to do? And that's why the Praxis Act was so important. So there could be a billable opportunity. There could be a career. It may not be lucrative, but at least the satisfaction there. So you got a combination of things. And they will tell you, I think the people at NATA will say that their shift to the way they educate and require education cost them a few people at a time that you know, you just didn't have a whole bunch of slots available where you could train and kind of ferret them out. It used to be, it was a lot like when you recruited other groups. You recruited 15 people hoping one of them stuck with it. And now we're going after the one elite one and gambling that they go. So it's kind of going to take a group effort, the docs that are supervising, the trainers promoting themselves. But I know that it was mentioned earlier, and I think you may have mentioned it, but the supply right now in our state is really, really low. I mean, some of the people that have pretty good opportunities career-wise and benefit packages, et cetera, they're having trouble finding people. So you know what it's like in certain parts of our state that don't. So it's going to take a group effort in that regard, I believe, just from what we've watched.
Well, if I could chime in here about the healthcare worker shortage, and this could be a whole new topic, a whole new night. We don't want to do that, but legislatively, we've worked a lot on the healthcare worker shortage as well. We've added EMTs to the list of individual professions who can get scholarships. We tried to do it with loan forgiveness. It didn't work because the certification is different. But, you know, we are thinking about this, and we're thinking about ways to actually recruit. Not so much athletic trainers. We haven't gone that route, but I mean, that's something that we could think about. But certainly EMTs will translate into, I mean, I know that they have a different focus, but in a pinch, or in an emergency, certainly I think EMTs and your emergency medical providers could step in.
This next question is for you, Alma. Do you feel athletic trainers receive an adequate level of emergency medical training or exposure to emergency treatment modalities?
Yes, as an educator, that is something that is one of my passions. And actually, Representative Moser had talked about simulation. One of the things that we like to do, and that is a huge component in athletic training, is starting to use more simulation, and specifically in emergency situations. So just a couple weeks ago, I had the Jefferson Community and Technical College paramedic students out here, and we worked on emergency scenarios, and we did interprofessional education where our students had to simulate on a mannequin. You know, there were different emergency scenarios. So this is something that as athletic trainers, is a huge priority for us, and we know that and hope that our students don't ever have these emergency situations in their clinical education that they have as students. But we also want to make sure that they are prepared. So we do, we have an entire course dedicated on emergency care. We do simulations on emergency care. We do interprofessional education on emergency care. And it will continue to be something that we will do even more of because it is so important. So yes, we absolutely have an adequate level of care for that.
How well do you feel that athletic trainers and emergency medical providers interact throughout the state?
So that's a great question as well. So one of the reasons that we had our interprofessional experience is because I think that there are sometimes some butting of heads. So there's a paramedic in the audience here that actually I worked with, and he allowed our students to do ride-alongs when I was at Northern Kentucky University, Chief Breeze. So I saw him in there. But there has been traditionally some butting of heads on the sidelines when emergencies happen. And so one of the big ways that we are working to combat this is education. You know, I think that's the whole goal of tonight. So interprofessional education is learning from, with, and about each other. And I think traditionally, athletic training programs and emergency medical services have not worked together. They haven't educated together. They haven't learned together. And that's an issue because the time that they're going to see each other is in an emergency situation when the stakes are high and we need to work together. So I think that there is a lot more push. I know that our interprofessional education with the paramedic program here, we also did it at NKU. St. Elizabeth also hosted something a couple of years ago with different paramedics and athletic trainers. So they're starting to get more information and more people working together, but that is something that we need to continually work on. And you know, my goal, if I can get my goal, that's so that we work on it as educators, as our students, so that when our students go out into the field and when the JCTC paramedic students go out into the field, they say, hey, I know you, I met you, you're an athletic trainer, I know what you can do, thank you for this, and we can have good handoffs and hopefully good outcomes for our patients. Go ahead.
You know, interestingly, last week, sitting in a meeting with a bunch of people who are a whole lot smarter than me, they're doctors, they were debating about and mentioning a key thing in the NATA template for emergency action is what is the order of precedence. And it's not going to be the same from Paducah to Ashland. It will vary, and having all of those people involved in setting that plan is really key. You know, if the EMT's there, they're first, or if the ATC's there or licensed trainer, they're the first. Laying that out sometimes is it's the cold drink of water, but when you're not in the situation and you've laid it out, you can execute it much easier than if you just said, let's see what happens, and then the alpha takes advantage, and now you don't feel as organized. So that's a really key point of the plan template that NATA puts out.
I know I'm not a panelist, I'm the moderator, but the simulation, I was actually speaking with an athletic trainer on Friday who said that 3 days into his job, he had a massive heat stroke, and he was so thankful for the large amount of simulation that they had done to be able to save that life.
And part of our education effort, and you and I talked about this at a different session, multimedia presentation in front of a group sitting like you all is not practicing. Practicing a list and memorizing it is not practice. And Mr. Mangine said something at a gathering we were at a couple weeks ago that I can't get out of my head. It is muscle memory. It is you've done it so much that you don't even think about it. You've done it so much you don't even think about it, and that's where we got to get.
One of the things regarding EMS and EMTs that I've asked as a reporter too is, have you discussed or have you given your schedule as a athletic trainer to the EMS that's right across the street? I asked that a lot around COVID time, just because there was already such heightened conversations between all of those, that I was actually quite surprised that when we kind of got back to normal, I guess, those conversations kind of ended. So
There's lots of talk about funding of AEDs, but what is being done to improve and/or mandate funding for an athletic trainer at schools as part of the required staff?
I can only speak, I'm not in school administration, but I can tell you that there's only a couple of positions that are mandated in the school district, and everything else is funded by the local Board of Education. You got special education coordinators, you got board counsel, and you got superintendent, and there's only a couple of others, and everything else is set up through the boards, and that's where the problem has been when a mandate came up. There was a group, there was a study committee of the legislature and schools and non-school people several years back. I think it was House Bill 383. And part of that finding was we needed them at every school, but nobody could get to the point of how do we do that. And that was 10, 15 years ago. And I don't think we're any further along.
Right. I mean, we have, we've mandated SROs in schools,
Yep.
but they're not funded. We've mandated school psychologists, and we don't have enough bodies. We can mandate things all day long, but if we can't, and finding SROs is also an issue. So, finding enough trained personnel is really a big part of the issue. Funding, yeah, I mean, it's always an issue, but, we have a budget that we set every 2 years, and we can shift things around and prioritize. The problem is no one's willing to give up their funding for things that are maybe antiquated or don't work. So there's not a good way to audit a lot of that. But, we certainly hear from a lot of folks when it comes time to set the budget. So.
And I think, Representative Mosier, you would agree, because I think I've heard this discussion when the nursing discussion was going on. Comparative to us, in the fall, at any point in time, there could be 6 practices going on. So what is that mandate? Is it one person on a merry-go-round? Is it 6 different people? And that comes up every single time somebody talks about the supply problem. And you see it, in the other medical areas you deal in a lot. It's just the supply is not there.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. It's probably more feasible to have one athletic trainer at the school and have a train the trainer sort of program, because you can certainly train your coaching staff in CPR, emergency action plans, and save a life while you're waiting for the EMTs to arrive or the ambulance. I mean, the point of all of this is to raise awareness, to help educate folks, and not expect that we're going to have an athletic trainer on every field when there are 6 practices. It's not realistic. So the only realistic part of this is to train the trainer and have anyone who's working with the kids well trained. The other thing that I wrote down when we were talking about how to hold schools accountable and how do we ensure that schools are being compliant. I think a good way to do this is, and we do require reporting in this bill. And so there is some reporting that needs to happen. We're going to have to write regs around that. We might even need to come back next year and add some things if we can't do it through regs, as far as how many AEDs a school has. But more importantly than that is, are the schools complying with the emergency action plan? Are they recording those rehearsed simulated rehearsals? Are they, is this information is it available publicly? And I think that would put pressure on the schools to comply. If parents can see maybe de-identified information, certainly we don't want to out any coaches who haven't, aren't up to date on their CPR. But if we have 3 out of 4 are trained, I think when parents and the public can see this information and it's available on the website, that's putting pressure on the school to make sure that these things are happening. So I think that it wouldn't be difficult to print out an emergency action plan and hand it to every parent when they're, signing their child up for the sport at the beginning of the season when they're signing all these waivers. Here's the emergency action plan so the parents know that the schools have this, and then they know the questions to ask, and they're aware of what should be happening. So I think that there are a lot of things we can do. Transparency is a great way to shine the light on some of the issues, and not in a punitive way, but in a way to put a little pressure on the schools to comply.
And I think while athletic trainers, you can ask, how do you mandate an athletic trainer, or can you? You can also ask, how do you pay for the large lineup of football coaches or basketball coaches or assistant coaches? There's lots of money that we found that these athletic departments have. So how are they using that money? And where is it allocated to health and safety? Those were the questions that we were asking when mandating an athletic trainer seems like, it's obviously a larger cost, and when we're all talking about costs.
Well, I think one other thing that Representative Mosier brings up a little bit in their process is got to happen here, because when they start about a mandate, even the members of the General Assembly start prioritizing differently. Reprioritization can get a lot of this done. I can't resist the opportunity to say I think she's going to be really pleased with regulation that's already been written that's going to require the publication of the seasonal rehearsal forms. It's already included in somebody else's reservations, I think, or regulations. I think she might like that one. But it's important that we get it out there. What's interesting is some of the steps in the emergency action plan are protected from open records. And part of it is because you're exposing a school safety plan. So now you get school safety advocates involved. It is a web to navigate, but certainly getting out there that they've done the right rehearsals, and here's the dates they did them, and here's how many coaches were there. That's low-hanging fruit.
I think with the emergency action plans too, you got to look at it at different levels. We're talking about high schools. And you look at the NCAA, it always takes something that causes major change. And now you look at, my father works at the University of Cincinnati as an athletic trainer, and their emergency action plan for the opposing team is posted directly outside the door. Mm-hmm. So that when they walk in, that athletic trainer coaches, everybody knows exactly what to do in the case of an emergency. At the high school level, that needs to happen. And it doesn't have to be mandated. As a parent, you can walk in and say, why aren't you doing this? We can sit here and talk about mandates and everything else, but like I said, it takes passionate people. And once one school's doing it, other schools are going to have to follow, because you're going to see an opposing coach come in and look at that and say, why aren't we doing this? And that's the thing, is it's an awareness issue. We can sit here and debate mandates, money, everything else. It's really if we're doing it and we're the gold standard, everybody else is going to fall in line and do it. And that's what we're trying to do at the foundation, is promote the schools that's working with us, show our programs, and guilt everybody else into following it so that they don't have these issues, essentially.
A couple of questions for Commissioner Tackett. If athletic trainers are a vital part of sports safety, why is there no transparency for the medical board committee? Those that are to be implementing the policies have no idea who to contact with questions and concerns.
Not exactly sure what the question's asking, but they can contact our office at any time. So I don't know what they're asking, to be honest.
What did you say about
It's-
the board?
It talks about there's no transparency for the medical board committee.
Well, there's not a board committee of medical. We do use KMA for quite a bit of advice, and they have a list. You have to contact KMA for that. We do get a lot of advice from doctors there. but it's not a committee we constitute or have any jurisdiction over.
All right, next question for you. Does the KHSAA have the authority to mandate AEDs at every athletic venue?
Not without legislative approval, because all of our regulations run back through the General Assembly. So whether you want to take the bite of the apple coming up through regulation or down through legislation, you're still trying to bite the same apple.
And then this one is from a parent. And before I read it, I do want to say that this project, Safer Sidelines, which was behind a paywall, is now free and open to the public. And we did that because we wanted it to have access for anyone, any parent, anybody to be able to read the series. So it is not behind a paywall anymore. It is open to be shared. This parent says, I feel...
Yeah, absolutely. We'll clap on that one. We couldn't get a copy.
Parent says, I feel overwhelmed as a parent. Where should we start? Do you have a 3 or 5-step plan for making sure sidelines are ready? What can we do as parents? That's the last question.
Yeah,
mean,
you guys can all go.
I don't know that there's, anything publicly. Everything that we've done, we've put together ourselves. If you get a chance, you can go to the website. We link with a lot of other foundations. We work with, I can't even tell you how many. There's a lot of great, it depends on what it is. There's a lot of different safety. We focus on heart because that's what happened to us. But at the same time, I focus on the APs as a whole. So it encompasses everything. Like I said, if you get a chance to go to our website, we have the 10 questions that you should be asking school administration and coaches as a parent to make you feel safer. I'll tell you, every club organization that we work with, it wasn't because I asked them. It was a mom that walked in and demanded from the director to come and work with us. And mysteriously, they came up with the money for AEDs, training, whatever they needed to do. So those are the kind of things. That's the biggest thing is educate yourself of what you should be looking for. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's why I get up here and do this. I can tell you 3 years, it'll be 3 years in June, and if you told me 3 years ago in 2020 that I'd be sitting here in front of you all right now, I would have told you were crazy. But sitting on my hands and being silent isn't something that I'm gonna do, and that's why I've been out beating the drum for the last 2 years.
I guess we can just go down the line. I would just agree with Matt about parents really are in the best position to make this happen. We can mandate things on a state level, but until parents demand that their coaching staff be trained, that they know what the emergency action plan is, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I would just start with asking for what's the plan? What's the emergency action plan? I think that's a very good place to start. Understanding and knowing the right questions to ask is another great place to start. But parents can put pressure on their schools to make this happen. As we talked a little bit earlier about the funds that schools and athletic departments use for things that are not necessarily there to create a safe environment. There's money for an AED, and there's certainly money for a free emergency action plan.
I would also echo that and just say, continue to ask questions. Don't take no for an answer. So if you get discouraged, just find your allies and get together. And I think one of the things that, we should all take away is we all want what's best for our kids. So let's work together and figure out what we can do. And, if you're going and you're asking questions and you're not getting the answer, ask why. Keep asking why. I think one of the biggest things, a lot of times, no one ever wants to ask. They say, do you have an AED? If they say no, ask them why. And if they just say, well, we just don't, that's not a good answer. So, keep asking questions, ask why, don't take no for an answer, and work together.
Well, I think I won't repeat what a couple have said, but I know when the sports safety bill first passed in 2009, the first thing we realized was that too many people were trying to splinter the message. And we set up a website called kyconcussions.com, and it had all kinds of stuff on it. We worked with Brain Injury Alliance, and we've actually talked about that internally, and I want to get with the representatives that were the two primary sponsors and see what their thoughts are on a central place where people can get information. It can tag to other places. It can go wherever we need to go, but we've got to give parents an information resource. We've got a ton of NATA stuff out there, and we've been on the good end of some of their reviews and some of the bad end, and that's just the way life is. If they give you a better incentive or an incentive to get better, then do it. I think the key thing you just said, and I couldn't emphasize it enough, is parents are more than willing to get involved when Johnny's not playing enough. We want that same enthusiasm for where is this? Just tell me. And like, it doesn't have to be a published plan that threatens security stuff. It can be summaries. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're going to do. Mr. Mangine answered earlier. I mean, the basic questions any parent would want to know. Who's going to take my kid? Who's riding with them? Just the basic list. Ask those questions if they're not being shared with you. Because one of the things we haven't mentioned is you have to keep in mind that at least, probably, I'm going to guess, and it's anecdotal, but it's close, 50% of our coaches across the board are not school employees. That makes it even tougher sometimes to let the coach be your only resource. Maybe it's the coach and the athletic director, and what do their sports medicine people think? But don't stop asking questions.
I think that's a really great reporter motto, too.
Yeah, it's interesting. She hasn't, by the way, but I'll also mention it rather ironic that more than a handful of our schools, she mentioned earlier that the CPR dates suddenly got updated. So did some of the certification forms. So sometimes the right people being I don't want to say pushy, being just not giving up makes a difference. I applaud what Mr. Fecchio and what Mr. Mangine are doing. I mean, gosh, dog, I don't know if I'd be crawling in a hole or not, but they're out there. And every parent should be out there just asking those questions.
I just want to say, first off, thank you to the people who are always behind the lens, so you never get to see them, but Matt and Jeff for running the audio, being able to provide everything for everybody who isn't here. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to Spalding for letting us have this amazing event, and for my editors for giving me the time to do this. It doesn't seem like it gets to happen enough anymore in journalism, so.
And presidential prerogative, as an EMT, I have to tell you, if you have to choose between an EMT and an athletic trainer, you want an athletic trainer on the sideline.